Good afternoon, everybody. Good morning, good evening. My name is David Mills, and it's a warm welcome to everyone for another Centre for Global Higher Education webinar. This is the ninth in a series we've been running on geopolitics, coming out of a workshop we held earlier in the year. And it's a real pleasure to invite three speakers who we haven't heard from before, all of whom work for an NGO in Switzerland called Paradigms. Dr. Amin Musa, Dr. Clemens Woolney, and Carol Switzer. And they're going to be talking to us about improving the participation of Syrian refugees in education through online study courses. So with no further ado, I'll ask them to talk, but actually I will just remind you all very quickly that as always, we record this webinar and we'll make it available tomorrow. And we have a huge archive on our website of webinars. We suggest you stay muted. We don't need you to have your videos on, but do use the chat function towards the end to ask questions, and we will. I will chair an informal conversation after about half an hour or so, and it's a great chance for you to talk to our presenters today and ask them questions and learn more about what they've been doing. That's enough from me. So I will stop and I'll hand over to Carol and Amin and Clemens, and the screen's yours.
Okay.
So first of all, thank you, David, for the opportunity to participate in this webinar series on geopolitics. For us, it's really, really interesting. We wanted first to explain a little bit how we fit in to the webinar series. So first, some background. Paradigms is a social enterprise and NGO. There we go. Sorry, I was waiting for the slide. We're a civil society organization. We partner with international cooperation actors. And here I can't help but refer to Lee's research team from a few weeks ago where they talked about the terminology in development sector. And we also rigorously avoid the term aid and really comply with what they were talking about. Paradigms provides technical assistance, again, a term that they use, to donors. Now, donor organizations are huge. They're really big. And even when they have the right intention, it's not easy for them to always do what they have planned to do or to achieve some of their newer, more enlightened goals. Paradigms is small, and our specialty is to link high-level academics with these donors. The donors really want that, but it's very difficult for high-level academics to participate because of some of the restrictions. So we staff our projects with people in the context or with experience in the context, and donors can't always do that because of the restrictions. So the context of this research is the refugee crisis caused by the Syrian war, the Syrian civil war. During which, as we all know, millions and millions of people were displaced, many of whom were youths. Many of them found themselves in neighboring countries, in particular Turkey, Jordan, Lebanon, and Iraq, who received most of the refugees. And the point is that here we are, a decade in or more, and these young people who are children are now university age. So this has become a big issue. These university students grew up in the conflict, some of them in camps and in neighboring countries. And for them, life really can't wait until the crisis ends. So there's been a lot of attention there justifiably to try to find solutions for them. The German Development Corporation has had several initiatives related to higher education in the region. And one is this project on improving access of these displaced Syrians to online higher education. As part of their project, they commissioned an evaluation of the effectiveness of this pilot project. And they asked that we conduct an independent research study that explored literature on the topic to see what was out there, to compare it with theory, and to see how the practice compared, And the study also referred to empirical data that we were able to get from the evaluation. So the aim of the research really was to explore opportunities for transferring the model and and also to see what the success factors were for studying in an online context. So the research team is independent. I want to say in the sense that Amin, for example, is affiliated with Notre Dame University in Lebanon, and Clemens is affiliated with the Bingen Technical University in Germany and with the Technical University in Rwanda as well. I'm affiliated with the Università della Svizzera Italiana here in Switzerland. But we came together for this research under the umbrella of paradigms. So in particular, we were trying to answer two research questions. The first of which was how to, to look at the conditions where online education is successful. What are the major challenges that students face, and for what providers face as well? And the second research question was, to which other vulnerable groups can this approach be transferred, and how? And it's important to point out, we wanted to point out this background here because our perspective is very much from the donor, which I think is quite different from what you usually see in this webinar. So we're looking at it from a donor's perspective with an idea of where their strategy can go to make most impact in these kinds of contexts going forward. So in terms of methodology, we had a comprehensive literature review, which was mixed because there's not a lot of material available specific to our study, which was Syria and conflict and online education. So we ended up parsing pieces of different studies to try to come up with pieces that were relevant for the picture. And there were very, very few that actually that dealt with all three. So we took pieces of online, pieces of other MENA countries, pieces of other conflict situations, for example. We also had a very rich source of data from the development corporation and from the online service provider, which gave us a great insight to the kind of conflict, the kind of challenges that are faced in this environment. We had also primary data conducting interviews with students, graduates, the providers, and international organizations and governments. So this gave us a very broad perspective, which now I'll turn over to Amin to talk more about that.
Thank you, Carol. So now we're going to look at the perspectives from the Syrian refugee crisis. Now, the Syrian refugee crisis has had significant impacts on higher education geopolitics, influencing policies and practices across multiple dimensions, some of which are the policy and advocacy, geopolitical implications, international support, cultural and social dimensions, impact on home country education, host countries, higher education systems, digital and distance learning. And in this study, we have covered most of these perspectives. So for example, we're going to talk about the policy and advocacy part. We're going to talk about digital and distance learning. We're going to talk about the host countries' higher education systems, the cultural dimension, the international support. So basically, this is a more comprehensive view of these perspectives. Beginning with online higher education, from our examination, we saw that there are some specific success factors which can make an online higher education system really succeed and really be effective. Some of these success factors, looking at them in general before we go into the specifics, some of these success factors is that online higher education enhances the teaching effectiveness and impact, especially when measured from a refugee, from a displaced person's perspective who doesn't have any access to higher education. It facilitates personalized learning and adaptive technologies. It encourages flexible pathways, and we're going to see how later on. Giving you a hint, we're talking about asynchronous higher education, asynchronous learning. It supports hybrid and blended learning models. So it's a mixture of different models that can cater for multiple needs. It improves access and inclusivity by widening access to a broader audience, let me say, of higher education seekers. However, we also noticed some challenges. Some of these are internal, others are external. Looking at the internal challenges, we saw that for online higher education, this requires heavily student engagement, motivation, student-faculty interaction to reduce feelings of loneliness. And we've noticed these among students pursuing higher education through online methods. Obviously, this is a very lonely journey. And being displaced, being from a refugee background, they need more engagement than a regular student. They need to be motivated even more from regular students, and there needs to be more student-faculty interaction. We also noticed that this requires listening and supporting for faculty, especially because this is a fully online learning platform. And some faculty who join such platforms, maybe they're not really used to fully online teaching. Struggles to integrate online collaboration and social learning, which is what actually happens in in-person learning, the social learning between the students. We've also noticed that it requires technological infrastructure and digital literacy, especially when talking about students in general and refugees in particular, who may not have the digital literacy required. Some of the external challenges are the negative perceptions of online learning and it not being recognized by host countries. And this is one of the major challenges that we face, is that online learning still has some negative perceptions, especially in the region where this study took place, and because it is not recognized by the host countries. We've also noticed that it has complex quality assurance and accreditation requirements. Again, because the host countries are not used to accrediting online education. And we've also examined restrictive employment for graduates, especially in the public sector. So we were just saying that governments, they don't recognize online degrees. So how about letting graduates of these degrees work in their public sector, which restricts employment opportunities for these students. For displaced students, now we're gonna take a more focused lens. It can even be more challenging. So there's inaccessibility to identification papers and educational documents for higher education. And here we're talking about those displaced individuals who leave their countries, their war zones. In a matter of days, they have to grab everything and just flee the war zone. They wouldn't be thinking about bringing their educational documents, right? They can barely think about bringing their necessities. So they leave their educational documents behind, and this causes some trouble, some challenges for them when they want to join a higher education institution. There are requirements to pass English foundation courses, and this is also available in programs that are offered in Arabic. The student dropout during the foundation phase, that was more or less significant for these students because they are displaced because of their status and because they are joining a very strict higher education institution where they have to follow certain courses and certain modules. So you can imagine the displacement and what it does. Family role and the gender of the student, and we've seen that this really impacts the enrollment. Adaptation to the learning environment, with these students most probably coming from traditional learning environments. And we've also noticed that there was a big impact for the specific living conditions in refugee camps. And here we're talking about unstable electricity supply in camps. We're also talking about the slow internet connection. And one thing we've noticed is the single mobile device per household. So you could see one household owning a single mobile device, which consequently leads to limited ability to develop digital literacy. These were really eye-opening in our examination and our study, and they were of the many hindrances that were really obstacles to students pursuing their higher education. Looking at this survey of 77 respondents, and here we can see where these displaced students live. And this could give you an indicator of their living conditions and why they might not be able to pursue higher education. So the biggest portion, the 39%, they live in a family home or a flat with other people's dependents. So it's a crowded environment, it's a crowded home. And then 27%, they live in a family home or flat with own dependents, their siblings, or maybe their children. 20%, they live on a campsite. And here we're talking about all the challenges previously mentioned. And only 14% they live by themselves in a flat, which provides perhaps the best conditions for pursuing their education. We also consider the perceptions of the students towards higher education in general and online higher education. So displaced persons, displaced individuals, they believe that they are frequently confronted with higher education programs that don't match their demand, as if these higher education programs, they are tailored in a way for these refugees or for these people coming to seek any sort of education. However, we've seen a notable difference with the university that we were surveying, University of the People, and we saw that it was offering really good and really challenging programs for the higher education students. And we've seen that in the interviews, they really felt challenged with the programs that were offered by the university. So that we could say that university was a good outlier. No recognition by official bodies of education and knowledge development. So these students are facing big challenges with the governments recognizing the education, the time and effort that they are putting towards their degrees. Structure of integration services was frustrating to students due to the poor interactor communication. So basically, this is what our respondents, the students, said how they feel about the interactor communication being very lengthy. They have very lengthy waiting periods. And we've noticed that Syrian refugee students in particular, they had positive perceptions of blended learning. So they saw that it develops their ability to learn on their own. And this is in contrast to what we've seen from literature about Albanian students, for example. So Albanian students, they perceived online learning as a difficult process and full of obstacles. They found it challenging to focus and comprehend the subject. In a way, we're saying that online learning has a diversified audience, and not all students perceive online education equally. So Syrian refugee students, they saw that they saw it positively, whereas Albanian students, for example, they saw it negatively. Now moving into the public perceptions, and here we're talking about the host countries not prioritizing the higher education and let alone the online higher education. For example, the government in Lebanon has not prioritized higher education for long, and it does not accredit or recognize online higher education yet. Perceptions of the public and the host countries towards online higher education are also influenced by the government's position. So we've seen that if the government itself recognizes higher education, we have seen that the public would look at that positively. Moving into the parents' views, so parents' views still influence student perceptions, and parents in the affected countries, they tend to be traditional. And here we're talking about Syria, we're talking about Jordan, we're talking about Turkey, Lebanon. So parents in these countries, they still prefer in-person learning, and they think that it is superior to online learning. And this really affects the perception and the motivation of their students. Some of the quality features for student satisfaction. So from our study, we found that asynchronous learning modes, and by asynchronous here, we're talking about the students taking their courses without the lecturer or the professor being there online. So they can take the courses at any time they like. They can be part-time students, they can work and pursue their education as well. So students here, they don't need to chase their courses, they don't need to chase their professors at certain times of the day. We've noticed that there is a need for clear course vocab. Some of the examples, for example, academic language, which we use in research, which we use in academia and at the university level, this might not be taught in the foundation language courses. So foundation courses, they focus on English language proficiency, but not as much on the academic language. Proper illustration of material in online modules, that was a requirement where students would really seek proper illustration of the material, because there is no first, they're not in person, they're not in the classroom, and there is no professor in front of them to just keep asking about further elaboration or further explanation. Reasonable requirements of online modules. We've seen that being offered in a very good way at the university we were surveying, where the requirements for modules, they were reasonable, not too much was required and not too little as well. Moderate pace of course track. Students in our survey, they really evaluated a moderate pace of the course track, with it not being too fast, because most of them, if not all of them, they have jobs aside. So they work besides their education, pursuing their education, easy to follow online directions, and having instructors that deliver the information with passion. And here we're talking about passion that is highly needed, because this is not in-person education, this is online, and we all know that it could get really boring when you're learning online. How to manage dropouts? From our examination and observation, we've noticed that there were high dropout rates as a consequence of non-selective admissions and low-cost modules. So some platforms, they don't have strictly selective admissions, and the cost is low because it is funded, because it is supported. So students tend to approach this kind of support being given to them as just any other opportunity. So they don't really value this opportunity because it's not costing them much, and they can be admitted easily. So on one side, this is a good thing because it widens access into higher education for these students, but from the student perspective, they tend to drop out because of these. Monitoring the student success, the learning paths are not linear, which on one side could be very good because students are not required to follow a certain strict path of the curriculum, whereas they are free to take their courses. So the path is not really linear, which could be helpful. Students can proceed as they wish, making it difficult to understand for the observer if the students are truly gone or suspending their study temporarily. So we really don't know, because the path is not linear, we really don't know whether students have suspended their education or have dropped out, or they are still there but they are taking a break. Some of the measures we could impose are measures on foundation courses, on the counseling part, on the advising part, so making sure that students are really aware of what they are getting into. Flexible entry and exit points. As I've said, these are positive. They allow students to move towards a degree at their own pace, and the asynchronous learning, which perhaps is the most positive part here, because it also provides greater opportunities for women. Key points for donors. So for donors, we could raise these points: some conditions for improving employability, having a job-ready curriculum design where graduates can go directly into the marketplace, applicability and practical experience while pursuing their higher education, having measurable and practical learning outcomes, accreditation, and we will always emphasize accreditation of online HEIs in the countries of residence, because this is one of the biggest challenges. Labor market access, and here we're talking about some skilled employability requiring academic study. So some of these graduates, they're finding skilled employability. However, a certain part of these students are ending up in unskilled employability simply because the governments of these host countries, they do not recognize their degrees, which is really sad. After having pursued all these years of education, they end up in unskilled employability. And we noticed an issue of exploitation of refugees simply because they are refugees. They are treated as second place citizens, if I may say, or students or career seekers. My last point is in a response to the first research question, which my colleague Carol had mentioned. I remind you, it was under which conditions is online higher education successful, and what are the major success factors and challenges? And here we're talking about flexible pathways offered by online platforms, as we've mentioned. We've noticed some success factors, including autonomy of the student, language proficiency, open mindset, reliable internet access, pursuing online qualifications. And we've noticed that this boosts the refugee self-esteem, giving them an identity of a refugee, giving them an identity of a student over a refugee, so they see themselves as students. We acknowledge that online learning can be lonely and we need support there, and there is limited recognition of online degrees. This ends my part, and I hand the floor now to Clemens.
Thank you very much, Amin, for the very detailed explanations of our findings. Now I would like to summarize our findings from literature, empirical data, observations, and so forth. And I want to present our responses in a very aggregated format of the SWOT analysis to question 2. Question 2 is, to which vulnerable groups can this approach be transferred and how? So when we look at the, then later on, I would like to give you some few policy recommendations, and I would like to comment in relation to the standardized evaluation criteria for assessing development initiatives. Now to the SWOT analysis. S stands for strengths. definitely the major strength is what has been mentioned already in some detail, the asynchronous module system and organization of the study program, which provides an enormous flexibility to the students, to the clients, so to say, who most of them are working or have responsibility in informal activities or with family in their family roles. We didn't meet any student who was saying that he or she could study traditionally during the daytime, for example. There was no one. Then the other point I would like to highlight is the capacity of the system. In this case here, the University of People, which with a very lean management organization and a well-organized learning management system. Moodle is applied here. On the weaknesses, I would highlight, and was mentioned that, in general, degrees are often not recognized within the host countries or by the public sector. And on the opportunities, the demand. Maybe I should highlight here the demand by refugees, by displaced persons in general is very high, as long as it is an affordable program and which can fit the situation, the living conditions of the person. General threats, it still has a negative perception, which is based on traditional thinking often, and the perceived value of an online degree. It's very difficult to assess that in quantitative terms, and it also differs from culture to culture, from country to country. But another point I would like to highlight is that instead of reactive communication activities and measures short-term, a more strategic approach would be required. Next slide. Next. Can you do the next? Okay. I have to do it, or? Okay. Good. Then we looked at the transferability. We looked at other populations, and I wanted to highlight, for example, Venezuela, Ukraine, and South Sudan, but completely different populations, and of course, only a part of which would be eligible or have the potential to study higher education online. But just look at the numbers; they are just enormous. And of course, Venezuela, for example, would require a Spanish program. Ukraine, maybe an Ukrainian program, because only 7 or 8% of the Ukrainians speak some English or good English. South Sudan, we don't know much. Or we look at other vulnerable groups in general within such countries or in other populations, such as young people, women and people in rural areas, or persons living with disabilities, or different ethnic minority groups. We think this program could be transferred. There's an enormous potential for this. Now, how could we address the gaps? The main and first-hand aspect is accreditation. This we came across throughout all interviews and discussions. That accreditation seems to be a key condition to the success of online higher education in general. Doesn't mean that you need to accredit the program in each and every country, but it must be a recognized institution, internationally recognized institution or agency. Another point I would like to highlight is when we look at such programs and want to assess, evaluate projects like this, we need smart indicators which are specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. If it's more general and not very clear, well defined, it's very difficult for the implementing institution as well as for the independent evaluator, and also for the general public. Last but not least, the legal framework. We have to think about how to deal with, and I have no answer to this. We have no answer to this, but the institution, I know, has some answers to it, or some institutions, how to deal with the student status for undocumented persons. What are the restrictions on the eligibility for employment in the host country? It's quite a difficult and complex situation, which is very often bound to in the local context. On the recommendations, I have to look at my time. This is based on literature and empirical data as well. Perhaps I should point out on the policy coherence, the multi-stakeholder collaboration, which would require a stakeholder mapping and cooperation between different stakeholders. Maybe normalizing perceptions. The most complex aspect is displaced persons should not be seen as a burden, but as a potential, as an asset, which is very difficult to address, obviously. For a donor's perspective, I would like to highlight the need to support any institution implementing such a program. Such institutions are usually very lean, as it's a low-cost model behind, and they need technical advice for this complex situation in a population of displaced persons. This could definitely strengthen the intervention. On the monitoring, I mentioned the parameters, key parameters are needed. And let's go to the next recommendation. Student services, Amin mentioned quite a few aspects on this one. And I think the foundation courses to prepare incoming students in the host country, potential students or persons in the host country. What can they expect? What are the limitations? What are the challenges? Here needs more work to be done by the local institutions, by the organizations, and directly by the institution provider. Recognizing prior learning is another challenge for the institution. This maybe can be done through interviews, because very often documentation is not available, and the assessment of the content of the modules is not that easy. Teaching and learning. Here we would like to mention communication mechanism, mainly through the learning management system. The Moodle in this case is a big challenge, and there's a need, and this was also mentioned by both faculty members and students in our evaluation, enhanced personal contact, and we have to think about how this could be intensified and improved. Next slide. Last slide actually from my side. Next slide. Looking at the evaluation criteria which are used in development assistance by the Development Assistance Committee of the OECD. Its relevance, coherence, efficiency, effectiveness, sustainability, and impact. On impact we cannot say too much at this point of time. It's too early because it's a relatively young program. But on relevance, maybe relevance was mentioned already, the asynchronous online learning environment. This was considered as highly relevant, as a big plus by all the persons we could get in touch, and also by the literature confirmed, because it perfectly fits the needs of the living situation of displaced persons. On coherence, maybe a comment. There's a value of studying in itself. To conduct a study, it has a value as such, but partnerships here with local organizations, with other universities, with local universities, which are very often completely non-existent, or even as a conflict of interest in sometimes even through donors, to different donors participating in such or operating in such countries, this would definitely strengthen the intervention. And on the efficiency, it's very obvious that a low-cost model, that's a low investment cost per student, is extremely efficient. Of course, we have to deduct dropout rates, retention rates, but the plus is that there's no donor dependency created between student and the donor agency, for example. So many of students even were not aware that there was a donor behind. They realized it somehow, but it was also not a problem, in contrast to many other development assisted projects. Perhaps on the effectiveness, my last comment, apart from the list here, we should also consider how the private sector for the future employer could be more strongly involved, which of course it's not easy. Thank you very much. I would like to hand over to Carol for the closing slide, please.
Thank you both. I think I'm going to cut this very short because and get to questions, hopefully, because I see some interesting ones already out there. We feel that definitely our research was limited. We were commissioned on, we had limited access to empirical data through one university, and we struggled to actually reach the students. Students in vulnerable contexts have problems, and we looked into it, and we have to give credit to our partner in this case, which Amin and Clemens mentioned, University of People, who actually we completely rolled through the approach, and they supported us to find other ways to access these students. But it resulted in us not being able to actually contact our original sample size, so that it was not as representative as we had planned. That's one of the key limitations. And that in general, with future research, there's a lot of potential. There's a big gap in research in online in general. It's new. Things have changed dramatically since COVID. So that also has an impact. And I think I'm going to, if it's okay, anticipate one of the things I see, which is a really exciting point from Eugene in Lebanon, who mentioned that we really need some kind of global recognition in the situation in Lebanon. In fact, we interviewed people in the government in Lebanon and ran into exactly what you're saying, where it's not supported at all. It's viewed very negatively, online education. And in fact, there is an effort. UNESCO has addressed this issue with its Global Convention on the Recognition of Qualifications, which they passed. It entered into force in March 2023, right as we were getting underway in this project. And 22 countries have ratified it. But something along those lines is needed. But we need to point out that it's not just a problem in the MENA region. This is a problem also in Europe. We don't have cross-country accreditation. There's no cross, it's a very difficult, it's a difficult problem when you have to cross countries in different nations. So we'll close with that on the presentation.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Amin, Clemens, and Carol. We have some really interesting material here that you've put together, some useful findings, but also some important questions, I think, for the higher education community around how we support online learners in these contexts. So thank you. I'm going to ask you to, you're going back to the beginning, and if you could stop sharing, then we can all see our participants more clearly. That's brilliant. I've got lots of questions about your model, but I won't start with my own thoughts. I'll start with the questions already in the chat. And I think, Eugene, you were first to come in asking both about University of People, which would be great to know more about, and just to comment on the Lebanese context. So Eugene, please.
Can you hear me?
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, okay. The University of the People is an amazing institution, and I can fully understand why you chose it. But knowing the situation, private universities in the Middle East, it's totally an outlier. Basically, it does the exact opposite of what universities tend to do, which is to be exclusive, even with OER. The data might be a little bit non-representative because they actually promote what we all are supporting instead of sabotaging it. The second issue is obviously employability in the public sector depends on government recognition of these degrees, but in the private sector, it doesn't. And I don't think many refugees are going to get government jobs anyway. So if there could be some sort of a mechanism, maybe based on corporate social responsibility, CSR, some sort of UN Global Compact agreement, or I just heard about this UNESCO Global Convention for Recognition of Qualifications. Thank you for that heads up. That would accredit these degrees for the private sector, where I would say almost all refugees are going to be working. That would be amazing. And we could start, Amin, as you probably can imagine, Amin and I know each other. We could start in Lebanon by looking for corporate support for a recognition of online education degrees. That would also be a way for us to leverage the the Ministry of Education and Higher Education, which really closed a blind eye to blended before COVID. The rule of thumb was it was sort of flu, as we say in Lebanese French, anything goes. If it's under 50% online, it's fine. After COVID, they said 0. One class online and the course will not be recognized, and thus the degree will not be recognized. So that's a very hard line, and very rarely is the Lebanese government rule of law based. But on this issue, they're really against it. So I would say let's work with the public sector for those reasons. Thank you.
So just to come in here, why are they being so strict about this definition of what counts as an accredited degree?
I don't know. I mean, I've been part of the OER committee at NDU for as long as it's existed, which is over 15 years. And up until COVID, it was, as they said, it was like anything goes, Yanni, as long as it's under 50%. And that's what we were all doing. It was largely for professors when they were traveling, or for the rare professors who liked to actually do blended before COVID.
Yeah.
Then everything went online. So it wasn't even blended, it was online education. And then when, I mean, was it 2021 or 2022 when they, 21?
I think 2022.
So when, on the 1st of September 2022, there was a hard and fast rule, no online education, no blended, nothing. And the rationale behind that, I think, is that online education not only broke down the walls, the people who were stonewalling against online education, it knocked down the walls, and the gatekeepers, it smashed down their doors, right?
Yeah.
And so all of these people who had vested interest in the system before COVID and saw everything changing in Lebanon using this very authoritarian mindset, they basically are turning back the clock to 2019, and they want it that way. And it's the universities more, I think, than the ministry, because if the universities wanted to do it, they would do it.
So one of the points, just to step in, is that we ran into was this political factor, which honestly was outside the scope of what we were trying to do. However, it's worth talking about. It's very interesting. There is a little bit of a conflict in terms of the governments trying to protect their local institutions, for example. And what we suggested to the donor, so the donor has an advantage, that this international sort of aspect, to try to bridge this gap because there's just as much as a threat, or we said more important, is the fact that it can help them to handle their problem with capacity. So, which is also being stressed by all of these people coming in. Now, we found this, and then the other thing is, to the donors in particular, was that you can't expect the online education provider to do this, because that's not their model. They're doing something else, which was very clear when we looked at all of the data there. They're doing something else, but there's no reason why that can't be a tool in the toolkit for these people to solve some of their own internal problems. This is what we were trying to say to the donor. But what happened, the donor, it puts the donor in a different position. They need to, rather than rely 100% on the implementer, which is the online education provider, University of People in this case, they need to step in and actually try to smooth some of these paths and try to point out some of these differences and get international organizations involved with this, to use it to the point that it can be used to solve some of the internal problems.
So I can see you just up again,
just,
but before
just ad hoc. The universities are not speaking for the professors. The universities are speaking for the administration and some of the professors. And the professors who like online, I've been doing online education since 2009. And so in 2019, when we had our mini revolution, we were ready to go. So what we need is, I mean, we're talking about power politics here. There are groups within each university who want to do blended and online. The university will not tell you about this.
Can I just ask one more question, Carol or Clemens? I mean, could you just tell us a bit more about the University of the People? Because obviously they sponsor this research. What are they
Well,
currently
wait,
doing and why?
just to be clear, the research was sponsored by the German Development Corporation,
Okay.
who works as a partner with University of People. And we happen to have 2 or 3 people that I recognize here from University of People, including the president, Shai. So I think maybe Shai, could you say
Perfect.
something about University of People?
I
Please.
raised my hand, so yes. Okay, so thank you. I would like to take this opportunity and first of all, thank Paradigms for their very hard work. I know how hard it was and how hard it was, especially to reach we were very cooperative, but to reach our students, for some reason, they were hard to be interviewed, but you never gave up. So thank you for doing it. And I like your comments, Eugene, as well. A few things. I think that online is probably the only solution for many students and definitely refugees. We have by now 16,500 refugees. We would have had much more of them if we had more resources to accommodate them. We have 3,000 Afghan women who study in the safety of their homes. Again, there are always the challenge of reaching enough students. But it is also true that online is not good for everyone. We use, and you use the term foundation in the presentation earlier a few times. I don't know if you're talking about our foundations, but if it is our foundations, this is part of our admission process. So the students take the foundations in order for them to see if they like what we offer, but also to show us that they meet our standard. So over 50% of the students don't make it. And you mentioned about the dropout, and this is the largest part of the dropout, students who take the foundation, try it, and cannot make it. But that's okay, because it's not good for everyone, but it's great for those who can make it, who, by the way, have no other opportunities. I think that the same goes for hybrid. I think that hybrid is amazing, but some of the students cannot have a hybrid. It's either online, which we offer fully online, or nothing. Well, I think that we are so much better than nothing. So for those who have no other alternative, online works perfectly. A few more comments. First, about the potential. The potential is huge. We are now trying to raise money to move into Spanish. We developed the Arabic. We teach in English. We have 137,000 students. 24,000 of them study in Arabic. We developed the Arabic mainly for Syrian refugees, originally BA in business administration, and recently we also introduced MBA in Arabic. Amazing success, 24,000 students studying in Arabic beyond refugees as well. So there is a demand. We hope to be able to do it in Spanish as well. You talked about Venezuelan refugees. We really hope to be able to offer a program in Spanish as well. My last point is about accreditation, and it is actually a challenge, mainly in the Arab world. In the Arab world, it's actually the only region in the world that does not recognize online learning in every single country. Now, it doesn't make sense. Most of the world recognize it. You look at the US considered to be the golden standard of higher education. There is no single university that doesn't offer at least one course online. Why not in the Middle East? Why isn't it recognized? So I know that there are some movement, and we're looking at Saudi Arabia, and we see that slowly things are changing, but it takes time. But we should remember that all over the world, higher education is conservative, and they are slow to move. And yes, they need to protect themselves. It is true, Eugene mentioned how everyone after COVID, while COVID was there, people moved online. There was no other alternative. COVID was over, and they said, we need to move back. Why? You saw how powerful it is, but I think it's a matter of time. So these are my comment, and thank you all for being here.
Good, thank you, Shai. Amin or Clemens, Carol, do you want to respond to any of that?
Yeah, maybe I would like to add that the multi-stakeholder collaboration is so important. I mean, when I was looking in Jordan at various programs over the last few years, I had the opportunity to evaluate some internal programs. implemented by donor agency, I came across this conflict of interest between university administration, which was mentioned by Eugene, professors, donors, and students, and expectations didn't match, and people were not talking to each other. The Ministry of Labor didn't provide certificates at that time for employment certificates for refugees. But of course they said, well, we are flexible, we can do something, we can do for the private sector, or you find work for them in your other project, and so on. So there is a flexibility, there are opportunities, but they're not taken. There's a lot of potential for this. The same in Turkey. In Turkey, there are a huge number of displaced persons from Syria, and most of them find their way somehow. But it's not the problem of studying online or not to study online. The problem there is it's a different level. It is the self-esteem, it's the support on psychological aspects, which has not been mentioned yet too much in our presentation, but which is a very, very important aspect. And it was very difficult to address it in confidential one-to-one interviews with students from different cultural background. But then you felt that this is a key aspect, which we have not to consider, and studying higher education in itself has a value. And online higher education offers a very good opportunity here. Not so much the subject as such or the quality, which we didn't look at the quality, we didn't look at the content, we didn't do any curriculum review or something like that. But the studying as such, this is very important.
And from your, sorry, go on, Carol.
Sorry, I wanted to underscore the fact that, in Turkey in particular, the status, there are so many overlaps with the political environment, because the actual official legal status of these people that are coming in, which are the biggest share goes to Turkey, is not clear. It's so they have this reputation of having received their brothers from Syria, yet they're not 100% received, and it puts them in a very vulnerable context. And education really can be a bridge for this. There's an opportunity there, but I think these international organizations can be key to bring the stakeholders together, as Clemens was saying, just to underscore that point.
Great, thank you. Monty King, you had your hand up for a while. Do you want to come in?
Yeah, thanks. I guess this is all just fascinating, and I've done some research for a few years now into OER and massive open online courses and their applications in the global south, including in refugee context. But I guess something Clemens just mentioned just now spoke to me. It's the issue of quality, because I want to drop a truth bomb into the discussion and just say that so much of the online higher education I see, especially coming out of the COVID pandemic, is rubbish. Long videos, no attempt whatsoever to chunk information. Basically, what would have been presented as a lecture in a room where at least the students have the chance to kind of discuss is just sit and watch this 45-minute PowerPoint presentation, click through. I mean, that's not online learning, and there's no attempt to blend that learning whatsoever. So when you apply that to a refugee context, it becomes even more important. And I guess my question for the group, I guess, is there was a slide on relevance and the importance of offering content asynchronously and online to make sure that people have that flexibility. Very quickly, it just reminds me of an organization I won't name, which still exists, which used to have on its homepage, it was for refugees in Rwanda, and it used to say, offering Rwandan children a guaranteed American education. And my thought was always, you know what, I reckon Rwanda should get a Rwandan education. And so I wondered, through either the University of the People or other universities involved in these projects, where is the attempt to contextualize and produce courses and learning experiences which have been built for people, for example, in refugee camps, living in situations where the normal topic may not really apply all that much to them.
Great question.
Should I reply?
difficult question as well.
Yes.
I think the short answer is that the model that we're talking about just does not address that, and it's not meant to address that. That's not where its role is. However, it doesn't mean that it's not important. I think it needs to be addressed. This definitely is a trend in education. There's studies now that show that the learning is better if they're learning in their local language and in their local context and so on. But this model is not that model. That's the only thing I can say shortly. There are a lot of advantages to it, but that is something it doesn't address, and I don't think it can. It would take away part of its power in a way to do that. Just a short answer, and I see Shai smiling, so I'm happy. I think Frankie has a question. We should go to Frankie.
Should I just comment?
Of course.
So, first of all, to say that online rubbish, it is true, like a lot of traditional university teach rubbish. Rubbish is everywhere. The question here, but if you take a university and look that it is accredited by decent accreditation organization, you assume that they know what they're doing, which is not necessarily true all the time. So we all agree with that, but it is. Regarding local context, I think you're right. I think that any program that will localize will be very powerful. We chose to go to the masses worldwide. We have students from 200 countries. We believe that we teach plain vanilla courses that is right everywhere, but it's not necessarily the best thing locally. So you pay price for our ability to teach 100,000 students rather than have a dedicated program for a smaller percentage. But yeah, sorry. Carol, you offered someone else?
Frankie, Frankie, please come in.
Frankie.
We see you, but we don't hear you.
Your muting is not unmuting. I'm not quite sure why. Okay. That's it?
No, now it should work.
It's coming. Yes, there we go. Frankie, it's yours. Oh, it's gone again. Do you want to type your question in the chat, Frankie? Might that be the best way of doing it? Yes, okay. Well, whilst Frankie is typing, I just want to ask a question really of you all about paradigms, because this is an unusual approach. You're doing research that's aimed very much as donors. Do you think that working from a consultancy like Paradigms makes it easier for you to work out how to do research that is effective in speaking to donor concerns, for example?
Actually, that's also an interesting point. We ran into this in another project. I mean, remember that throughout, and I won't mention names who they were, but you know them, believe me. They threw out some of our very valuable evidence because it was produced by an NGO. We had, ironically, right in that same week, written a blog article about research that's just been done about the overlooked opportunity with NGOs. We definitely believe that we can provide access. So what we can do that donors and these big investors, huge international organizations can't do so well, is we can actually get some real data from the field. So I think this is our value, is being able to get a little bit. It's not always popular, I have to say, but we can definitely maneuver more easily, definitely.
Well, I mean, I'm also thinking, university-based researchers can actually say the unpopular things because they have the university behind them to so it's not, yeah, I mean, I think what you're also trying to say probably is that you're better able to understand how to build what people are looking for in terms of donor agendas. And
yes, because we have access to to people from that. And we work, the other thing we do is we work very closely with the people that are commissioning the research. So we don't go off, we check in all the time. We get their perspectives as well. And we do a broad spread on getting different views to try to test the hypotheses.
Okay.
Yeah, sometimes it's a bit difficult. Sorry, sometimes
Carry
it's a
on.
bit difficult to convince practitioners in development to apply a scientific approach or an academic approach and to ask certain questions in a different way. And to that's probably you know that that's not easy, because very often short-term solutions are looked at, but then the intervention has other implications which are not yet considered. And the short-term thinking in project time-bound phrases, it's also wrong.
No problem. Yeah, absolutely. Frankie, you get the last word if you can come in now, please.
Yeah, sure. We've gone over time,
Yes.
so I'll be very quick. So I work for UNHCR, which is the UN's refugee agency based in our education headquarters. I focus on digital learning. So this topic is of real interest to us and fascinating to see the research and to hear more about University of the People, which is a model that's, I think, really challenged our thinking. And so really interested to hear more about it. I just wanted to pick up very quickly on the point around contextualization, because I think it's so relevant. Like I think traditionally we have thought, the universities we work with as UNHCR in a higher education context, we have generally preferred a more contextualized approach. But then, well, firstly, I think UOP have challenged our thinking on this, but then I've seen, I think there are unique specialities or specificities about the refugee context, and particularly think about the right to work, right? So over 70% of refugees live in contexts where they don't have the right to work. And even in the private sector, they'll face some kind of barriers, whether they're formal or informal. And so opportunities pop up like where there are loopholes, which is maybe in the remote work sector, right? Or where you find third country pathways on labor mobility, where specific technical skills might be needed to access those kinds of opportunities, right? So I think where you have technical higher education or tertiary education, which can fill those skills gaps, which may be sector specific, that, we've seen really interesting models of that are not contextualized, that are not accredited, but that have been successful. So for me, the contextualization question and the accreditation question are critical, but underneath that is this question of like, what is this program working towards? Like, what pathways have we set up, and where does this program sit on that pathway? And that line of thinking, in a way, I'm starting to think is more important than just thinking about accreditation. Accreditation from like the NGO or the UNH from the UN perspective is critical because, like it can be very hard. I was speaking to our colleagues in Kenya today, and they were saying, look, we've just got hundreds and hundreds of online opportunities for refugees. We can't decide what's quality or not. We don't have the time or the expertise to do that. And so accreditation, national accreditation, is our way of saying, look, as a refugee, if you come to us, this is what we can recommend. But it's an answer to a question that's not always like taking into account all of the exceptions to that answer. I know we've gone past time, but I'll just say very quickly, I think a couple of points that I think are really important. I mentioned work, I mentioned accreditation. I think collaboration is critical, right? Looking across different contexts, and especially collaboration with national universities. We've seen in so many refugee hosting countries, the vast majority of refugees are in low middle income countries. Universities have really stepped up, including in Lebanon. Like we've seen one university in Lebanon enroll over 1,000 refugees without taking any tuition fees. So universities in countries of first asylum are really stepping up, and we need to think, how do we, if we're developing online opportunities, let's look at a country like Niger, for example, where there's very little history of online learning. Do we come in as outsiders and replace what might be the start of an existing provision of online learning? Or do we, and thinking about the collaboration question here, the donor community, the UN agencies, the universities, the local civil society actors, do we rather think about online learning as a way of complementing and collaborating with those existing offers, whether they be established or whether they be nascent? And I think that's another really interesting question to explore, so that we're not just falling back on kind of one solution, but really looking at one solution as part of a broader ecosystem and looking at countries individually. And UNHCR is, we have a really, well, I'll say important. I don't know if that's a self-important word, but we have a role to play within this. So yeah, thank you so much, and handing back over to you.
Thank you, Frankie. You asked a whole series of great questions and themes. I'm going to have to get you come back and give a webinar on our series sometime, because I think the UNHCR has a really important role to play, as you say. But I'm going to give the last word to Carol, Clemens, and Amin, if you want to come in finally.
Clemens?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think it was a very important discussion today, and many issues were mentioned, but as many more things to discuss, and maybe we have another opportunity to continue at another place, at another time, the discussion. Yeah, definitely, it's a high priority topic. Thank you very much for setting up this webinar. Thank you so much.
Excellent. Thank you, Clemens. Well, I will then wrap it up, because we're now just gone past our time. So the Centre for Global Higher Education is really pivoting to really think quite hard about the margins of higher education and how we support universities in the Global South. Next Tuesday, we have a webinar on the African Association of Universities, and that continues our theme on webinars and the role that can play in bringing African universities together. I know that we'll need to come back to these questions of accreditation. The Global Convention is really important. That was a big focus of the UNESCO conference. And it's great to welcome all of you. If you are here for the first time to our CG webinar, please get in touch and do offer to give a webinar, because we're always keen to hear from those of you both inside universities and working on universities. For now, I shall say goodbye from Oxford, UK, but thank you all again for coming, and see you very soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.